Quarantine Station Epsilon 9 floated. The dead zone between star systems, existing solely because someone in the Galactic Collective had looked at the statistics of cross-species contamination incidents and decided they really didn't want a repeat of the Andorian fungal incident of 2247. The station was a testament to bureaucratic, according to YouTube analytics. 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel, that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Paranoia built to handle exactly one job: keeping potentially dangerous biological entities away from populated space until someone smarter figured out what to do with them. The Rathe for all their crystalline elegance and 4,000-year history of philosophical enlightenment were notorious sticklers about contamination protocols. Their home world maintained such rigorous environmental standards that visiting diplomats had to undergo 17 separate decontamination procedures before even breathing the same recycled air as Orthe Council member. So when Orthe transport vessel limped into scanning range with a hull breach the size of a small shuttle and its distress beacon screaming about compromised cargo, every alarm on Epsilon 9 started howling like a pack of caffeinated Jing Quan. The human xenobiologist assigned to the station had been reviewing protein synthesis models for a particularly stubborn strain of silicon-based bacteria when the emergency klaxons decided to ruin what had been a perfectly boring Tuesday. Actually, scratch that, calling any day boring on a quarantine station was like calling an active volcano slightly warm. Things either moved at the pace of continental drift or everything exploded simultaneously. Today was apparently an explosion day. The transport vessel's crew had already evacuated, which was standard procedure for anything involving potential biological hazards. They'd rather sacrifice a ship worth several million credits than risk exposing a single crew member to unvetted organisms. The human had to admire that level of commitment to self-preservation, even if it meant dealing with whatever nightmare the universe had stuffed into that cargo hold without any helpful context. Station Commander the Zalon, a Bravixian, whose eyedocs twitched with anxiety at the best of times, was practically vibrating as he briefed the quarantine team. His translator implant gave his words a clipped, perpetually annoyed quality that perfectly matched his personality. Vessel registered as cargo hauler, designation Morning Clarity. Manifest indicates 3 juvenile ages ranging from 2 to 4 standard cycles. Transport was en route from the Velroth colony world of Ixalar Prime to the diplomatic station at Kepler 442. Hull breach occurred in Sector 7, cause unknown. Life support compromised, crew evacuated per protocol 17 minutes ago. The human processed this information while pulling on a hazard suit that had approximately 47 too many seals and fasteners. Juvenile Velra weren't exactly common in this part of space. The species reproduced slowly, treasured their offspring with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, and generally didn't shuttle them around in cargo vessels like packages. Why were cubs traveling in a cargo hauler instead of a proper passenger ship? The human asked, voice muffled by the suit's respirator. The Saolon's iox drooped, which was Bravixian for I have no idea, and that concerns me greatly. Manifest doesn't specify. The Velry authorities are being characteristically opaque. They've requested immediate retrieval and transport to the nearest Velry facility, but given the hull breach and unknown contamination vectors, we're required to hold them here for observation, which meant the next several hours would involve carefully extracting 3 terrified alien children from a damaged ship, scanning them for approximately 900 different potential pathogens and keeping them comfortable while their parents probably experience the Velry equivalent of a complete nervous breakdown. Fantastic. The retrieval team consisted of the human, 2 automated drones with enough sensors to detect a virus thinking about existing and enough remote monitoring equipment to live stream the entire operation to every relevant authority figure and 3 star systems. Nobody wanted responsibility for mishandling Cubs. The political fallout alone would require its own containment protocol. The airlock cycled with a hiss that sounded uncomfortably final. The damaged transport vessel's interior was a mess of twisted metal and flickering emergency lighting. Velry ships normally resembled floating art galleries, all elegant curves and bioluminescent panels. This one looked like someone had taken that art gallery and introduced it to a particularly aggressive asteroid. The cargo bay doors were still sealed, which was a minor miracle given the structural damage. The human approached carefully, scanning for radiation, toxic gases, and anything else that might object to biological life existing in its general vicinity. The readings came back mostly clean. Whatever had torn through the hull hadn't compromised the cargo bay's integrity. The door controls responded on the 3rd attempt, sliding open with a grinding screech that definitely wasn't part of the original design specifications. The cargo bay beyond was dark except for the pale blue glow of emergency lighting. 3 small shapes huddled together in the far corner, barely visible against the shadows. Velry cubs looked almost nothing like their adult counterparts, where mature Velry stood nearly 3 m tall with crystalline carapaces that refracted light into rainbow patterns. The cubs were small, soft-looking things covered in fine, downy fur that shifted through subtle color changes based on their emotional state. Right now that fur was flickering between deep purple and sickly gray, which the human's database helpfully identified as extreme distress. The largest of the 3, probably the 4-cycle-old, stood partially in front of the other 2. Its posture screamed protective instinct. Despite being roughly the size of a medium dog, the cub's large multi-faceted eyes tracked the human's approach with obvious weariness. Hey there, small ones, the human said quietly, knowing the cubs wouldn't understand the words, but hoping tone might convey something useful. Let's get you somewhere safer. Yeah, the response was immediate and unwelcome. All 3 cubs began emitting a high-pitched distress call that made the human's teeth ache, even through the hazard suit's audio dampeners. The sound triggered approximately 16 different alert protocols simultaneously, and the Zalon's voice crackled through the calm with all the patience of someone who just had their day get substantially worse. What are you doing to them? Existing apparently, the human muttered. They're scared. Give me a minute. But a minute didn't help, neither did 5 minutes. The human tried approaching from different angles, tried sitting down to appear less threatening, tried Every gentle voice technique in the Xenobiological Handbook, the cubs just press closer together, their distress calls escalating into something that probably violated several noise ordinance regulations. The transport back to Epsilon 9 was accomplished through creative use of the automated drones in a containment field that the cubs absolutely hated. Their distress calls didn't stop. If anything, they got louder by the time they reached the station's quarantine wing. The human's head was pounding and every xenobiologist on staff was clustered around the monitoring stations, watching with varying expressions of concern. The cubs were transferred into a spacious containment unit designed specifically for juvenile care. It had everything the database suggested cubs might need: appropriate temperature and humidity, controlled soft surfaces for resting, automated feeders loaded with nutritional supplements appropriate for their developmental stage, and absolutely zero sharp edges or potential hazards. The cubs hated it immediately. They huddled together in the center of the space, refusing to interact with anything. When the automated feeder extended with their first meal, they recoiled as though it had personally insulted their lineage. The distress calls continued, now mixed with smaller sound that the human's translator identified as calls for parental figures. This was going to be a problem. Rothay cubs required specific care regimens. They needed regular feeding, temperature regulation, and social interaction to develop properly. The standard protocol involved careful monitoring from a distance, while automated systems handled physical needs, minimizing potential contamination vectors while ensuring the subjects remain healthy. The cubs evidently had not read the standard protocol and had several opinions about it. Hours passed. The distress calls faded to whimpers but never stopped entirely. The cubs refused food. They refused water. They just pressed against each other, their fur flickering through increasingly unhealthy color patterns. Medical scans showed elevated stress hormones and dropping blood sugar levels. This isn't sustainable, the human finally said, watching through the transparent containment wall as the smallest cub's fur went completely gray. They're going to make themselves sick. The Ceylon's Iox drooped even further. We're following established protocols. Juvenile care procedures have been proven effective across 47 species. Great, add Velry cubs to the list of species that think our protocols are garbage. The humans stared at the huddled cubs, mind racing through every scrap of xenobiological knowledge accumulated over 6 years of studying alien life. Something was missing from the equation, something the protocols didn't account for. The cubs refused to settle. They refused comfort from machines. They just waited, crying in the darkness for something the station couldn't provide. And their fur kept flickering between purple and gray, a living countdown to whatever came next. The station's AI, which had been programmed with the collective medical knowledge of 700 species and possessed all the bedside manner of a particularly judgmental refrigerator, offered its assessment at the 6-hour mark. Physiological analysis indicates subjects are experiencing acute separation anxiety exacerbated by environmental stressors. Recommendation: introduce calming pheromones compatible with Velry biochemistry. The human authorized the attempt, though something about the whole situation felt wrong. The containment unit flooded with a carefully calibrated mixture of chemical compounds designed to soothe juvenile wrath. The cub's response was to huddle tighter and emit a new sound that the translator struggled to classify before settling on profound disappointment. Well, that went brilliantly, the human muttered. Our 7 brought a new strategy, the AI suggested, introducing ambient sounds from the home world, the crystalline chiming of their forest structures, the harmonic resonance of wind through their architectural marvels. The audio files came from the collective cultural database, guaranteed authentic buyer. Authorities themselves, the cubs looked even more miserable if such a thing were possible. Our 9 saw the arrival of a Cathrian medical specialist, summoned because Cthraxians were renowned across 3 sectors for their empathic abilities and gentle approach to juvenile care. The specialist, a being whose entire body seemed composed of flowing, luminescent tissues, approached the containment unit with confidence. The cubs took one look at the Cathrian's undulating form and somehow managed to press even closer together, which violated several laws of physics the human had previously considered non-negotiable. Fascinating, the Cathrian murmured through their translation device. I sense overwhelming need for physical proximity to a specific type of life form, not parental figures precisely. Something else, the emotional signature, is unusual. Can you fulfill that need? The Zalon asked, his eyes practically nodded with stress. The Cthraxian extended a tendril toward the containment field. The cubs recoiled. Apparently not. My apologies, whatever they require, my physiology does not provide it. By hour 12 the situation had deteriorated past concerning and was rapidly approaching catastrophic. The smallest cub had stopped moving entirely, just lying against its siblings with fur so gray it looked like ash. Medical scans showed dangerous levels of stress hormones and metabolic shutdown. The cubs were literally willing themselves into medical crises rather than accept the station's hospitality. The human had exhausted every standard procedure, violated a few experimental ones, and was seriously considering options that would probably result in a formal reprimand. Meanwhile, a growing crowd of xenobiologists, medical staff, and concerned personnel gathered around the monitoring stations, watching 3 small creatures slowly give up on existence. There has to be something we're missing. The human said, more to the universe than any specific person. Some behavioral trigger, some environmental factor. They were fine before the hull breach. Something changed. Obviously something changed. Th. Salon snapped. Their transport was destroyed and their escort crew evacuated. They're traumatized juveniles in a strange environment, surrounded by unknown species. But that wasn't quite right. The human had worked with traumatized juveniles from dozens of species. This wasn't normal fear or stress. This was something more specific, more targeted. The cubs weren't afraid of the station or the staff. They were waiting for something. Their eyes tracked movement beyond the containment field with desperate intensity, watching, searching. The human pulled up behavioral data from the transport vessel's final recordings before the crew evacuated. There, the cubs had been fine initially. Even after the hull breach, they'd huddled together but hadn't exhibited distress. Then the crew began evacuation procedures, sealing the cargo bay and preparing to abandon ship. The distress calls started exactly when the last crew Member left the vessel. They're not afraid, the human said slowly. They're lonely, we've established that. The Xalon replied, separation anxiety from parental figures is documented in 40% of juvenile species. No, not lonely. For their parents specifically, lonely. For presence, for proximity to something alive and warm and breathing nearby. The AI process this data suggests cubs develop in communal environments with constant supervision, recommendation, maintain visual contact through monitoring systems. They tried that. The cubs didn't care about being watched. They needed something else, something the sterile protocols and careful procedures couldn't provide. The human stood at the containment wall, watching the cubs' shallow breathing, their fading colors, their absolute refusal to thrive in perfect safety. Somewhere in the back of their mind, a memory stirred. Earth mammals pack animals. The way puppies cried themselves sick when separated too early, the way human infants failed to thrive without physical contact, even when all physical needs were met. The velray weren't mammals, they weren't even carbon-based in the traditional sense, but maybe, just maybe, some needs transcended biochemistry. I have a terrible idea, the human announced. Terrible ideas the human had learned over 6 years of xenobiological work usually fell into one of two categories. Ideas that were terrible because they violated common sense, and ideas that were terrible because they violated regulations. This particular idea had the distinction of violating both simultaneously, which honestly felt like an achievement worth celebrating under different circumstances. Absolutely not, the Xalon said before the human had even finished explaining. His idox had gone completely rigid, which was Bravixian body language for I'm about to cite so many regulations that will be here until next Thursday. They're dying, the human said flatly. We've tried everything else. Every protocol, every procedure, every brilliant suggestion the collective's best minds could offer. Nothing works. They need proximity to something alive. Then will requisition of Elrathi, caretaker from the nearest diplomatic station. Estimated arrival time is 47 hours, accounting for transit through the quarantine buffer zone, and they'll be dead in 47 hours, the human gestured at the medical readouts, painting increasingly dire pictures across the monitoring displays. Look at those stress indicators. The smallest one has maybe 12 hours before complete systemic failure. We don't have time for proper channels. The Catharian specialist still present and radiating concern through several wavelengths of light, rippled in what might have been agreement. The human raises a valid point. These juveniles require immediate intervention beyond our current capabilities. Immediate intervention does not mean violating quarantine protocols designed to protect both us and them, the Xalon countered. His translator implant was working overtime to convey just how deeply unhappy he was with this entire conversation. Cross-species contact with unvetted subjects is forbidden under Collective Regulation 774, subsection 12. Paragraph. I've read the regulations. The human interrupted. I've also read the mortality statistics for juvenile experiencing prolonged stress events. Spoiler alert, they're not great. What the human didn't mention was the other factor gnawing at the edges of this decision. Humans had a reputation in the collective, not a bad reputation exactly, but a weird one. They bonded. With things everything really, other. Species maintain professional distance. From research subjects treating them as fascinating puzzles to be solved from a safe remove, humans named their laboratory equipment apologized to plants when pruning them and had been known to adopt anything that held still. Long enough, the collective found this behavior simultaneously endearing and deeply concerning. Let me try the human said quietly, worst case scenario, they reject me like they rejected everyone else and we're back where we started. Best case scenario, we keep 3 cubs alive long enough for proper Vel authorities to collect them. The Salon's Iox performed a complicated dance that the human had learned to interpret as I hate everything about this, but I also hate watching children die, so I'm trapped between 2 equally unpleasant options. If you contaminate them with unknown pathogens, I'll undergo full decontamination procedures first. Every scan you want, every precaution in the database. I'll wear a hazard suit if it makes you feel better. It would make me feel marginally less likely to be demoted to waste reclamation duty. The Zalon muttered. The decontamination process took an hour and involved enough chemical showers to strip paint off a hull. The human emerged feeling approximately 7 layers of skin, lighter and smelling like a chemical factory that had given up on subtlety. The hazard suit came next, sealed with enough redundancy to survive hard vacuum, not exactly cuddly, but it would have to suffice. The containment unit's door cycled open with a soft hiss. Every monitor in the observation area was active, every sensor trained on the space inside. Half the station's personnel had found reasons to be in or near the observation deck, apparently watching someone potentially make history or commit career suicide held universal appeal. The cubs' reaction was immediate. All 3 heads lifted, multi-acided eyes focusing on the human. With sudden intense interest, their fur rippled through color changes too rapid to track. The distress calls cut off mid-note, replaced by a different sound. Quieter, almost questioning. The human sat down slowly, trying not to startle anyone. 3 pairs of eyes tracked every movement with laser focus. Hey there, small ones, mind if I join you for a bit? The largest cub took a tentative step forward, then another. Its fur flickered between purple, blue, and a soft green that the database tagged as cautious curiosity. The other 2 watched, trembling, but didn't move. That's it, the human murmured. I'm not going to hurt you, promise. The cub covered the remaining distance in a rush, closing the gap between them with stumbling urgency. It pressed against the human side, fur immediately brightening to a warm golden shade. The smallest cub, the one that had been practically Kamiyama's moments ago, lifted its head and made a sound that bypassed the translator entirely and went straight to some primal understanding center in the human brain. It was calling for help, for comfort, for something to make the universe feel less enormous and terrifying. Come here, little one, the human said, extending a hand slowly. What happened next would be analyzed in xenobiological journals for the next decade. The cub didn't just approach, it practically launched itself at the human, scrambling with desperate intensity. The 3rd cub followed immediately after, and suddenly the human was surrounded by small, furry bodies pressing close from all sides, making sounds that ranged from relieved chirps to exhausted sighs. Well, the human said to the monitoring equipment, and the dozens of fascinated observers. Beyond, guess that answers that question. The cub's fur rippled through increasingly healthy color patterns. Their breathing steadied when the human carefully lay down on the containment unit's floor. The cubs arranged themselves with practiced precision. One curled against the human's chest, one pressed along the back, one tucked into the space behind bent knees, like they'd been waiting for exactly this configuration, like they'd known precisely what they needed and had simply refused to settle until they got it. The medical readouts began showing improvement within minutes, stress hormones dropping, heart rate stabilizing. The smallest cub, the one that had been circling system failure, started purring. The sound resonated through the hazard suit and into bones, a vibration that felt older than language. Outside the containment unit, the Zalan stared at the monitoring displays with all the enthusiasm of someone watching their carefully organized universe develop unexpected complications. The Cthraxian rippled with what might have been amusement. Other personnel whispered among themselves, already composing reports that would make their way up command chains and across diplomatic channels. The human lying on the floor of a quarantine unit, surrounded by alien cubs who decided that regulations were optional, couldn't help but smile. Terrible ideas, it turned out, sometimes worked. The Wraith diplomatic vessel arrived 31 hours later, making the trip in record time and probably violating several transit regulations in the process. Their lead representative, a crystalline being whose carapace reflected light in patterns that suggested barely contained fury mixed with overwhelming relief, stood in the observation deck and watched through the containment field as 3 cubs slept peacefully against a human who'd been lying on a metal floor for the better part of 2 days. Explain, the representative said, their translator rendering the word with approximately 40 layers of emotional subtext that ranged from gratitude to indignation. The Xalon did his best. The representative listened with increasing stillness, which was apparently body language for processing information that fundamentally challenged their understanding of reality. Your species, the representative finally said, addressing the human directly, is classified as a moderate threat predator with aggressive territorial tendencies and concerning pack bonding behaviors. Our cubs bonded with you. This should not be possible. The human carefully extracting themselves from the sleeping cubs with movements that suggested extensive practice in not disturbing napping creatures shrugged. Your cubs didn't read the classification documents, they just knew what they needed. Research teams would spend months analyzing the incident. The prevailing theory suggested that cubs, during their critical early development phase, required proximity to large, warm-blooded creatures on their home world. Adult Velrath fulfilled this role, despite their crystalline physiology, generating sufficient heat through metabolic processes in the cold, sterile environment of the transport vessel and later the station. The cubs had sought the nearest available substitute. They'd chosen the walking, talking predator who radiated body heat and possessed soft surfaces and made soothing sounds. Evolution apparently cared less about threat classifications than about finding something warm to sleep against. The implications rippled through the collective like a small Earthquake. If Wraith cubs could bond with humans, what other species might find? Unexpected compatibility, the careful walls between predator species and prey, species between carbon-based and silicon-based life between, classifications designed to keep everyone safely separated, suddenly looked less like immutable law and more like suggestions nobody had bothered to question. Humans already known for adopting everything from violent murder lizards to sentient fungal colonies gained a new reputation, universal comfort objects, the species that other species children instinctively trusted. The human watching the cubs finally reunited with their actual caretakers couldn't help but notice the irony. Humanity had spent centuries trying to prove they belonged among the stars, that they could be trusted with advanced technology and interstellar responsibility. Turned out all they needed was 3 scared cubs who refused to sleep alone and the willingness to lie down on a cold floor until the universe made sense again. Sometimes the greatest diplomatic breakthroughs happen not in council chambers or treaty negotiations, but in quiet moments when someone simply offered warmth in the darkness. 6 months after the incident, Epsilon 9 received a package from the Rothe home world. Inside were 3 carefully crafted crystalline sculptures, each depicting a small cub in a different restful pose. The accompanying message, translated through 17 layers of formally diplomatic language, essentially said, "Thanks for not letting our children die while we were busy being bureaucratic about safety protocols." The human kept the sculptures on a desk that had previously held only coffee mugs and data tablets. They served as a reminder that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions to complex problems involved nothing more complicated than showing up and refusing to leave. The collective eventually updated its classification system. Humans remain listed as predators with concerning pack bonding tendencies, but someone added a footnote that essentially translated to approach with caution, but maybe let them your kids if things go sideways. It wasn't the most flattering diplomatic designation in galactic history, but it was honest. Humanity had carved out a niche in the universe, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by being the species that would lie down on a cold floor at 3:00 in the morning because some scared cubs needed someone warm nearby. Universe, it seemed, had been waiting for exactly that kind of ridiculous